on with practices in city government, weren't sure just how widespread it was, and they said to the readers in their forums, hey, would you mind helping us figure this out? And they got a flood of information that was valuable and useful, not just foolish, but really good stuff, and they did some investigative reporting based on, in part, what they got from their audience. To me, this is again, great idea. Not every investigation needs to be a secret until the day it's broadcast. In fact, most investigations, I would argue, are going to be better if you bring to that investigation the people in your community who might know more than you do, which is to say, everybody. They will know more than you do if you do treat it that way. They will know. That blog I showed you from Washington, the political blog, they do this all the time, and they get piles of documents from the government and invite their readers to help them sort them out. It's a smart technique, and it works very well. Another way of involving community in journalism is to use tools that are web-based. In this case, in the Boston area in the U.S., potholes in the streets. There are not enough journalists in the Boston media to figure out where all the potholes are, but there are enough people who live there. They know where the potholes are. And they help put this map together. There are some issues in doing a project like this, including how do you know the data is good? These are issues we deal with as we work on things where we involve the audience in what is also called crowdsourcing, that many of you, I'm sure, have used, if not thought of. And again, we're sorting our way through it. It's going to be fun. The Guardian is crowdsourcing, or was crowdsourcing, material about expense account abuses by members of Parliament. The interesting part of this was that they started off on the story way behind their top competitor, the Telegraph, which originally got the documents in a lead. And the Telegraph was doing one story a day, one big story a day on these documents, and terrific stuff, just terrific. And the Guardian gets the documents and says, well, we're way behind, how do we catch up? And maybe there's a better way to do it, or at least as interesting a way to do it. So they put the documents online and said to the readers, hey, you all, see what you can find, and we'll do this together. And they rapidly caught up, and in some ways have gone ahead of the Telegraph, although this is one of these competitions that I think that everyone wins except the members of Parliament who have been using their expense accounts. So that strikes me as a win-win and minor lose, but a big win for everybody else. Wonderful way to do journalism in this new age. Can be taken further, the combination of crowdsourcing and things like the potholes. There's a site in the UK called Fix My Streets, and what they do is collect information from members of the community, from the residents, and then connect it to the people who can actually fix the streets, namely the local government agency that is responsible for the streets, and then report back when the streets get fixed. This is journalism. It's not the standard journalism of the past, but I would argue strongly that this is part of our mission as journalists in a community, is to tell people what's going on in ways that are not just about what people say, but about how everything works. We can also involve people by getting their opinions in many different ways. This is a fascinating project that has a slider from strongly disagree to strongly agree. It creates this kind of mixture of opinion about major topics. And I put it up not because it's the greatest thing in the world, it's an experiment. I put it up there partly because this idea did not come from a journalism organization or some company, but from the U.S. State Department. The point being that we can learn things from anybody. We should look widely and way past journalism for ideas on how to pull people into the work we do and how to collaborate with our audiences. So I'd love to see people use something like this. One of the areas that I find almost painful to discuss is comments. And comments on news websites, at least in America, tend to be a place that we're in the physical world. I would never let anyone I love go here. Because, in part, because journalists and their organizations don't treat the comments seriously, don't moderate the comments, don't treat the commenters in a way that is not about just saying, well, you all have talked there, and I don't care what it is, we're not going to pay attention in any event. Rather, maybe we should say, we're inviting you into our home for a conversation. And we're going to, in our house, we have some rules. One of them is that you don't sit on the rug in the living room. One of them is that you are civil when you are in our living room. We have a conversation where civility is the only rule that matters, and that we can disagree strongly, but we will do it in a way that maintains respect. I don't see a lot of news organizations taking that approach, partly because it takes time and resources to do it. But partly, I think, because I do believe we can turn comments into this kind of ghetto for people we find otherwise annoying. And I think that's a mistake. So there are a lot of ways to handle it. This is from the Washington Post, which is a classic way of not to handle it. If you read the comments in the Washington Post, it's unbelievably terrible. And really just a waste of time. But there are some techniques that we can start thinking about. This is from a non-journalism site. Does anyone recognize what site I'm going to? This is Amazon.com, where they've done a real innovation. It's called the real name. How do they know the real name? Well, they have the credit card. And they can verify that that's you. Now, somebody can spoof a real name and inherit it. It's a lot more difficult. The interesting part is that I find almost invariably the comments, and typically these are reviews, I find the reviews on Amazon that are under someone's real name are invariably more intelligent and better written and more thoughtful than the ones that are anonymous. Not always, but often. Much more often. In fact, I wish Amazon would give me a way to only see reviews written by people using their real names and to make everything else disappear. That's a tool they should offer. I've been asking for a long time. Maybe it's on a list somewhere, but it's not a high priority. But we could do some of this with our own comment systems. In fact, we could put comments from people with real names at the top. That's what I would do. And I wouldn't prevent people from posting anonymously, but I'd find a way to help people not see them if they chose not to see them. Slashdot is a technology-oriented site where the comments are essentially the content, and they have an elaborate system of moderation that I don't have time to go into, but it's human beings doing moderating, and they're all doing it as volunteers because they're part of this community. It's extraordinarily successful, though flawed, operation, and they also give you levels of comments. So the moderators rate things from -1 to a +5, where a +5 is terrific, and -1 is, you don't ever want to look at that because it's so terrible. I set my threshold of Amazon Slashdot comments when I'm reading. I set it to 4 and 5, so I only see the 4 and 5. And since they get hundreds of comments on many of their postings, that'll end up with from 10 to 30 or 40 things. I think something I care about, that's enough. And they're actually quite good. Am I going to miss something terrific? Absolutely. Because the comments, the moderators are human and don't make mistakes. Will some stupid things get into the 4 and 5? Absolutely. Happens all the time. But on balance, it's a good system, and again, something we could all learn from in our news organizations. Another area that is just getting off the ground, and I'm particularly excited about this myself. In fact, I'm working on something for a project. Is the idea of making games related to the news and having people understand the current of the world better through the game. This is a game for your WikiLeaks. It's very simple and quite interesting. There are tools available now that make it easier to create games on the fly that we could put on our sites and do things that are very interactive with our audience. Now, this is one technique. I'm not saying we should make games out of our news in general, but we can use it in a way that helps people understand better the world around them. Conversation also goes into something I'm very strongly advocating in the news organizations, which is that we be more transparent. That journalists and the news business have practiced the opposite of transparency, which is to be very opaque over the years. We don't tell people how we do our work, why we do our work, except in very abstract terms, and we don't tell people a lot of things that they probably deserve to know. I'm convinced that in the world that we're in, we should emulate the bloggers who are more transparent and to encourage it universally. And we can be transparent in any number of ways. This is a couple of examples of the many I could give. The New York Times did an investigative piece about a local congressman who then wrote a long letter attacking the piece. The Times put the letter on the web, and then next to it, comments from the reporter addressing the points in the letter. It stopped there, which I think is a mistake. I think this should have gone on for a while until a reader who cared enough could actually make an intelligent decision about what to trust. But it was a good start. It was an open thing that I'd like to see more organizations do. The right of reply strikes me as something that we can offer in a very general way when we use the web, and we don't do enough of it, and would be valuable for everybody. Another transparency thing would be to explain more about how we do journalism, in part because the more our audiences understand how good journalism is done, if it's done well, they'll actually have more trust and respect for what we do in a general sense. This is from the New Yorker magazine, which did a very influential piece that I'm pointing to here about the U.S. healthcare system, which is another difference between our country and the rest of the world. We have an insane healthcare system. And this was he had discovered a particularly an insane part of the insane system, and wrote about it, saying this makes no sense, and explained how we found out what was going on. Terrific journalism. It actually influenced the debate, and it was done in a transparent way that not only showed us how we've gone about it, but the techniques of the reporter acting almost as a detective. It was a wonderful piece of journalism, and done in a way that I think improved our understanding, not just of the topic, but of how to go about doing things. We can do more about ourselves. We could also, I think, not do what the Washington Post did in this case, which was to order its journalists not to use Twitter and other social networks in any way that might reveal to anybody else that the reporter or editor was a human being. So nothing could be put on a social network by a journalist, according to the Post, that would have any humanity attached to it. For fear of somehow poisoning the well, that people would think, well, they're biased about this or that. I'm sorry, we're human, we are all bring biases, and we're used to the table, and maybe a little more transparency would do us a lot more good, and I disagree with this decision. I'm not saying it needs to go as far as telling, putting our tax returns and medical records online. I don't believe that. I'm saying we should explain our worldviews, especially as organizations, and be clear about it. people understand the worldviews if they read something over time or watch something over a period of time, but it doesn't hurt to say so. So, the example I'd like to give, when I go to London, I buy the Telegraph, which is terrific journalism, establishment-oriented journalism, it's slightly to the political right. And I buy the Guardian, which is also very terrific journalism and slightly to the political left. And I assume that I'm kind of triangulating on reality by getting a better picture, because their worldviews are clear. And the more we do that, I think, the better off we are, and the reading public or listening or watching. People are not stupid, and they're actually, I think they welcome these kinds of things. It's not common with them. There's still another, again, many examples I can show you, is a kind of transparency practiced on the site Wikipedia, which shows you every change ever made in every article. Not only that, they show you there's a conversation going on in the background of every substantial article where the editors and contributors debate with each other and talk to each other about why stuff is in the article. And where they say, well, someone will say, well, who are you? How do you know this? And they insist, of course, that Wikipedia you point to source material that you don't have that any assertion be backed up by some source material that is at least relatively trustworthy, a news organization or some documents. Again, this is transparency we could practice more of, maybe not to this degree, but I think we could do more than we do. In my own case, one level of transparency is to welcome error reports, which we don't do very much in journalism. If somebody tells me about a mistake in the book out here, and they're the first to tell me, they're going to get a free copy of the next edition. That's how important it is that I find out where I screwed up, because I want the book to be better. And since there will be multiple editions and a revision of this one, I think it's important to welcome these reports and reward them. Other ways of interacting with journalists. There's so many, I don't know where you begin in some ways, but data interaction and mashing up, and I'll talk about these in something called APIs, which is it stands for Application Programming Interfaces. I don't expect journalists to become programmers, I should caution. Though that would be a bad idea in some cases. I do expect journalists to learn how to talk to a programmer and engineers so that we can collaborate together, and believe me, the engineers are part of the future, a big part. And we need to know how to communicate with them so that they can help us do better journalism. And they really want to. They're very good. They have the same public instincts that we have in many ways, and we should welcome them. So data everywhere. This is a site in the U.S. called Everyblog, owned by MSNBC now, that has data about communities, and you put in an address in the communities and search, and you find out everything going on around it that they can get data, which turns out to be quite a lot. Things like sales of property, crime, inspections of restaurants, local news from bloggers and from news organizations, and any number of other things, including census data, all variety, and very carefully arranged so that it's easy to look at. It's not traditional journalism, but it sure is part of the information of the community, and incredibly interactive. They've just added a service to this for people to tell each other things that they know, not just what they're finding in the databases. Those APIs I was talking about, it's basically about wiring information together from one place and another. And without getting technical, you can use tools. This is from something called Yahoo Pipes that lets you pull data from a variety of formats, including RSS, which if you don't know about, you should learn, into many different kinds of ways, and data of other sorts, and then filter it and sort it and get other results. You can have simple ones like that, you can have not so simple ones like this, though it's not as hard as that may appear to look. And created by some folks who posted it, and the code behind it on Yahoo for anyone to play with and change and adapt. Wonderful tools, and you can create interactive ones using these for doing your own journalism better and for helping your audience join you in it. You can add, talk about visualizing. Any chart in a newspaper or on TV is a visualization of numbers. And numbers are kind of hard to understand if they're in a table or a spreadsheet. But when they're visualized, they get easy to understand. This is something I was a co-founder of a company that now owned by Nokia, where people shared their travel plans, and at the end of the year, we would send everyone a visualization of what they've been doing for the past year. The most alarming visualization for me here was that my carbon footprint was 2 Hummers, which was not good news. But that's the indication of my travel. But that visualizes in a way that I'm embarrassed about the amount that I travel. But again, it tells stories, and there are now elaborate sites available to help us do this, and to do it with each other. This is a site IBM runs called Many Eyes, the notion of putting many eyes on problems, where people put up data sets and other people play with them, and put up the results of how they played in a visual way with them. Highly recommended to go take a look, and maybe you have data you could put up and play with and have other people do things with in ways that you didn't expect. This is a visualization of how the Walmart retail store chain grew in America, starting with that one dot in the middle of Arkansas, in the middle of the country. The years are going by at a constant rate, but something is accelerating, as you can see. The spreading of this retail chain, and I should note that every one of these stores is huge. I mean huge. And it's become the dominant retail chain in the world. It gets more so that I stopped in 1995. But think about this. This tells a story. That just told a story in a way that is really possible now on the web more than we could have ever imagined doing it in print. We could have done it on TV, but it's not quite TV-ish. It's a new medium. It's a new collection of media, and we can use these things as starting points and help and make them interactive with our audiences and ask people to help with analyzing data. And it gets more and more interesting. Another conversation we're having with our audiences, they don't know that we're having it, but it is in fact part of the conversation. That's measurement. We can measure with online media what's going on, what people are doing in ways that were absolutely impossible in the pre-internet era. And this has good elements to it and some little bit bad ones in the issue of privacy. We should be careful and attentive to privacy, but we can find out what people are doing on our sites in ways that we never could do in the past. And that's good news. It's not good news if we only promote things that are popular, because popularity does not equal quality. It may, but it's not a one-to-one equation. But we should at least know what people care about. We can find out where they're coming from. We can do another thing with testing of things. This is when we have a website, we can put up a slightly different page for one set of people on a site as opposed to another. So Mozilla, which makes the Firefox browser, they put up a page when they were just putting out Firefox 3, and on the left it says, try Firefox 3, on that green link there. And 9.7% of the people who saw that page tried it, clicked on that for download. And then on the right you see one that says, download now, free. And 10.1% of the people seeing that page downloaded Firefox. So, guess which one they decided was going to stay up online? The one that worked better. And given that they have hundreds of millions of users, that tiny percentage difference actually adds up to a lot of people. We can do this not, again, solely for commercial or create reason reasons, but for really good reasons. We want to know what works. And we have an unparalleled tool based on a conversation